Linda Fox. I'm senior reporter with PhocusWire. Delighted to be here with Daniel Marovitz, and he's senior vice president of Booking.com's new Fintech unit. So welcome, Daniel. Great to have you with us.
Great to be here. Thanks a lot.
So really, the announcement of the Fintech unit was only announced, well, the first 3 weeks ago, I think it is now.
Yeah.
So in broad terms, just tell us why Booking.com is getting into Fintech.
You know, we could approach it from a few different angles, but I think maybe the best way to think about it is, you know, Booking.com and many of our competitors have been for years and years, in the case of Booking, more than 2 decades of kind of slogging away, trying to solve lots of problems, but at its heart, the kind of accommodation problem. You know, how does a hotel express the inventory that they have and set pricing and upload photographs and descriptions? How do travelers, how do consumers establish a search and then deal with the complicated results they get and look at consumer reviews and look at photographs and make their choices, right? And I certainly don't want to declare victory. You know, even though we've been at it for more than 2 decades, it's a devilishly complicated problem, and there are lots of things that we'd love to do better and continue to optimize and enhance. And it seems like no matter how much work we do, there's always a roadmap that's a mile long of things to fix in that core journey. But if I think about it, if I pull the lens back and I think about, what we've done in accommodation and the short-term rental space and the hotel space and kind of everything in between, plus rental cars, plus flights, plus attractions, all the things we've added in the last few years, there is one big mountain that we haven't really tackled, and it is a mountain which is the source of a lot of consumer pain and a lot of supplier pain. And so I guess in my mind, the announcement of the Fintech unit and our focus on the space and putting a lot of attention and resource against it is recognition that travel is different than other categories of e-commerce. And financial issues and payments issues are more complicated, cause more pain, cause more friction than the mostly kind of domestic experience people have with e-commerce when they're buying physical goods. Mm-hmm. And it's the last mountain to climb, and we want to climb it. It's a big source of customer service calls. It's a big source of conversations our partner services people have with suppliers throughout the world in markets. And we think there are really great ways to do kind of 3 things, right? To improve and accelerate the experience that bookers have, to improve and take operational cost and operational risk away from suppliers so that we become an even better platform to do business with. And lastly, we think there are opportunities to create really interesting new sources of revenue while reinforcing benefit to both sides of the marketplace. So simple answer, long answer, simple question, long answer, but I hope that helps.
Great answer. So, this mountain that you're looking to climb, travel is kind of intrinsically complicated. It always kind of has been, lots of legacy systems, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess, off the back of a pandemic, when travel is really struggling and we're still kind of unsure, why now?
Yeah, I mean, look, we have leaned right into this problem straight through the pandemic. So we continued to grow, grow headcount and invest in systems and build relationships with suppliers right through, all of the darkest days of 2020. Certainly there is certainly uncertainty in travel for sure. Of course, that's just a fact. Everybody can read the news and think about their own experience. But we have no doubt whatsoever that travel is coming back, and it's coming back with ferocity around the world, where it can, when people feel safe, when governments allow it, when regulations allow, et cetera. Obviously the vaccine drives in many parts of the world have been really impressive. It's also sad, of course, to see that there are many parts of the world which are really lagging, and the developed world needs to reach out. But we see this need to travel, this desire to travel is really fundamentally human. And we can see from our own data that whenever restrictions come off, there's kind of an explosive burst of travel activity. And we see that happening, all over the place. So we certainly think travel is here to stay, and something that's going to be an important industry and a growth industry for many, many years to come. There will be changes, of course, as a result of COVID, but our fundamental belief in the sector is unwavering in the face of the pandemic. And so we made a decision about, whether we would kind of retrench all of our efforts or whether we just kind of double down and push. And that's what we decided to do. And we've continued to build functionality, to build relationships, and grow the team to tackle this really tricky problem, which is, payments and financial product that supports travel and experiences.
Cool. And did you kind of have to go to Glenn and say, okay, this needs to be its own unit because we have to purely focus on the fintech side of it?
Yeah, look, Glenn and I had many discussions for a long time about it. It's complicated. There are lots of different ways to skin the cat, so to speak, right? And payments are, payments is a weird product. I think you can't deny that, right? You can look at payments from a financial lens. You can look at payments from a kind of purely classical product lens. You can look at payments as a horizontal enabler. You can look at payments and related products as kind of a new business. And it's kind of all those things and none of those things and a combination of those things. And so, particularly as Booking has an unusual history with payments, unlike most of our competitors that leaned into payments, pretty aggressively from their earliest days, including some brands within the Booking Holdings group, like Priceline, which has been doing payments for 20 something years.
Yeah.
Booking had a different approach, right? So we had this agency model where the payments were taken by the hotel, and it was very inextricably linked to our absolute fanatical dedication to this kind of A/B testing optimization methodology, which I'm sure you're familiar with, which has been kind of a hallmark of how we operate. And, there are enormous, astounding pluses associated with that model. I think it's not disconnected that Booking adopted that model early in its trajectory and achieved a position in the industry that really nobody else has, right? There are lots of reasons for Booking's success, but I think that absolute attachment to data, the kind of unemotional look at A/B testing as the force of things, has been really important. But what it also leads you to do is to try to simplify and take friction out. And so payments and related things were just viewed as a source of friction. And so kind of we kept it aside where many other brands didn't. And it was probably the right decision for a long time, but it also prevents you from doing certain things. It prevents you from adding value to the marketplace, in certain ways. And so that's why we've kind of changed our view on that.
Okay, cool. So what are you thinking in terms of, the greatest sort of areas of friction in travel payments currently?
Oh, it's a long list, but I'll go through some of them. And of course, we are, as are most of our competitors, we operate in a marketplace which kind of redoubles or quite literally doubles the payments and financial frictions that are connected with travel. It's very different from being a merchant where you have some stuff that you sell yourself. The payment story is a lot easier than than a company whose business is built around facilitating an intermediary and brokering transactions between two parties, which is kind of fundamental to the Booking approach. So what are those problems? Well, the first one, which is kind of obvious, but I think it's interesting to think about it in kind of philosophical terms, is that, if you think about, all the big e-commerce players, right? If you think about, the mighty Amazon, which is obviously, amazing company, everybody has tremendous respect for what they've achieved, and they're kind of the 800-pound gorilla in so many markets. And on the one hand, it's a big global business, but on the other hand, you could argue that Amazon is actually a collection of domestic verticals, very large domestic verticals, but they're domestic verticals. So what do I mean by that? Amazon US is basically shopped by US customers in US dollars in English. And it's serviced by Amazon in the US or by merchants in the US or by Chinese merchants working really, really hard to present themselves as US merchants, right? In Booking.com's marketplace, obviously the less exotic pairings are of course more common, right? Somebody going from Germany to the UK or going from, New York to California. Of course, those sort of, less exotic pairings predominate, but we do send people from Papua New Guinea to Paraguay. We do send somebody from Chile to Japan. That really doesn't happen in most, physical goods e-commerce. So you have, payment methods and currencies and kind of payment cultures, which are different in different countries that you have to cater for. And it's actually one of the things that we can do as an intermediary business to provide value to both sides of the marketplace is by understanding what those distinctions are and offering that kind of richness of a feature that people expect locally, and also helping people take their local experience across a border. So what do I mean by that? A Chinese booker who wants to pay with Alipay or WeChat Pay, because those are the things that make all of China work, both online and off. When they go to a small hotel in Yorkshire, they've never heard of Alipay. Well, if they book through the booking platform, we can help the Chinese guest pay with the way and in the currency that they're comfortable with, and also make sure that the Yorkshire hotelier gets paid in the currency and in the method that they're comfortable. So essentially, we can insulate both sides of the marketplace from each other's complexity and sometimes opposing desires. So that's one point. I think there are emerging products around buy now, pay later, and around installments, which we think are important. Those have been really common in parts of Northern Europe and in Brazil and in Mexico, across many parts of e-commerce, not just in travel. Those are really standard. They're relatively new experiences for many consumers in other parts of the world, but
are they
that's
helpful?
quite interesting.
Do you think they're helpful? Are they,
I
they a
think
sort of
so.
lasting trend?
No, I think so. I think for a number of reasons, right? I think that one is, travel is a category with higher average prices than many other parts of e-commerce, right? So, people are spending hundreds of euros when they buy travel services, whether flights or accommodation or other things, right? If not thousands of euros, right? And when people buy from most e-commerce places, of course, sometimes people buy a computer, they buy an iPad, which is a pretty expensive item, but they also buy a lot of things which cost $15, right? And so I think the ability to kind of assist conversion with the ability to pay in installments is something that matters, and probably matters more in some respects because the ticket sizes are higher in travel than in many other sectors.
What are the kind of challenges of, enabling the Chinese traveler to pay with the mechanism he or she wants to pay in to that boutique hotel in Yorkshire in the currency and the way in which he wants to pay? I mean, what are the challenges we're talking about there?
Oh boy, I mean, lots of challenges.
Yeah.
It's super complicated, right? And in some level, the fact that it's super complicated, it's a blessing and a curse, right? I would say, but in more ways, I would say it's a blessing. Why is it a blessing? Because, it's something that a company of our scope and scale can afford to invest in and build and research and manage and do the legal work and do tax work and build and manage all these relationships. It's something that we're kind of scaled to be able to do. It's expensive to manage lots of different providers. They all have terms and conditions, their APIs change, the product changes. You have to do quarterly business reviews and look at roadmaps. And so, the complexity is really quite extreme. There also is, and I think people sometimes forget about this, but, I mentioned it before, and I really think it's true. Payments are a product. It's a product experience. It's not just a kind of financial mechanism. If you think about any online flow that somebody goes through, right? And it doesn't matter whether it's travel or whatever, but you either go directly to some website or you do a search and the search leads you to a page and then you go through somebody's funnel. Frankly, the only part of that funnel that matters is the last step.
Yeah.
Do you or don't you, right? Do you hit the button and commit? It's the difference between aspiration and commitment, right? And so, getting people across that last hurdle, the famous abandoned shopping cart problem that people have been talking about since 1996, it's a big deal. It's not a small thing, right? And so how do you make somebody feel comfortable? How do you make the experience relevant? How do you present options so that you give them flexibility, but you don't overwhelm them? How do you make sure that you're able to save data so that you can, smooth that process and don't leave people fumbling for their wallet to find the card and running up and down stairs and all that stuff? And making sure that, what you present to a Chinese guest is different than what you present to a Dutch guest is different than what you present to an American guest, because the payment brands and payment cultures are actually different and really, really different, right?
Yeah, really different. What can you share in terms of the opportunity for new revenue streams for Booking.com and the Fintech unit?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think some things I would say kind of watch the space. There'll be more information from us over time for sure, but there are opportunities in foreign exchange for sure. I think we have an opportunity to try to take risk and take fear out of the travel process. And I think everybody has had the experience of, in the olden days of, waiting for the Amex statement to show up where you open the envelope. Now, of course, it shows up as an email, or as an alert on your phone. But, I think a lot of people, when they travel abroad, they cross a border and they cross, let's call it a currency boundary. They open that statement, however it is delivered, with some trepidation to see, did I get charged a terrible foreign exchange rate? How much am I actually paying in sterling, for my trip to Korea, right? I did some math when I was in that store in Seoul before I bought that thing, and I thought I knew what I was spending. And then you open the bill and you say, wow, that's a big number. Or you get hit with, £2, £4 of cross-currency fees or cross-border fees. And so we think that our ability to, we think that there is an ability for us to decrease the cost for consumers, decrease the risk and the kind of anxiety for consumers. And we also think there's an ability for us to make margin while achieving that.
Okay. Now, you mentioned data a few minutes ago, and the credit card companies are often talking about them being the sort of ultimate collector and holder of data. So how might data that you collect help drive personalization going forward?
Well, look, I think in lots of ways. I mean, the first thing I would say is that data is kind of core, as we talked about before, right? Data is core to our business, and I think there are obviously lots of companies that have gotten good at kind of a data-centric way of operating. But, for Booking.com in particular, it is very much woven into the fabric of our genetic code as an organization, right? So we are a company that is kind of committed to, not committed to good ideas, we're committed to good experiments, right? So, if you have a great idea, it's kind of interesting. If you have a great idea where you can generate a great experiment and then prove with data that your idea is right, then people get excited, right? And I would say across my career, I've been at Booking coming up on 4 years. I've never experienced a company which is so intellectually honest about how it approaches product development problems in this truly, absolutely data-driven way. And so I think, what we're doing in the fintech space is not a world away from what happens across the rest of the company. The only thing I would say is that maybe in the fintech space, because financial stuff is so inherently, organically quantitative, it's easier, right? It's harder to design good experiments about whether a light pink or a darker pink on a button drives more or less conversion, right? And we do those kind of experiments all the time, and we can find statistical correlations between a light pink and a darker pink, in a UI. But when you're dealing in the financial space, it's so obviously quantitative. It makes it maybe easier.
Okay, look, we're on time here, but let's just finish with this. Do you think travel payment standards are needed? There was one, I think the Open Payment Alliance started up last year, and I just wondered what your thoughts on that were.
I guess from which perspective? So I think because there are a lot of different.
Yeah, so basically, do we need to have, for things like cross-border, that's an obvious one. There must be other areas where you would see standardization proving helpful, useful to consumers and suppliers.
Look, I think what's difficult about travel as a sector, and we talked about this before, right, is that it is this inherently cross-border and therefore multi-jurisdictional experience.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about money, with the the almost exception of the European Economic Area, but of course it has exceptions. Even outside of Brexit, right? You have exceptions with Sweden, for example, and Denmark, which still maintain their own currency even as members of the union.
Sure.
With the exception of the EEA, anytime you cross a border, you cross a currency boundary. And currencies are derived from governments, which are derived from central banks, which are derived from governments. And so getting to commonality around these things is really, really difficult. Even within, the European Union, there are distinctions. There have been a few things which have been achieved around interchange caps to try to promote the use of direct debit and debit cards as opposed to credit cards. So there's some things that have been achieved there where there is some commonality, but there still are differences country by country within the EEA. So I think it's very difficult to kind of get to standards, just because it's the power to regulate payments comes from central banks, which are inextricably linked to a specific sovereign government.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm sorry to say we have to leave it there. I would say thank you very much for the insight. This has been a great conversation. Thanks.
Thanks a lot.